a column of Russian military vehicles set off to assault Ukrainian positions. However, this attack was not a surprise. The Ukrainians were prepared for the enemy and greeted them with plenty of well-placed gifts. First, the strike is carried out by the FPV drone operator, and later, Ukrainian artillery joins the attack. With accurate hits, they destroy several pieces of Russian equipment, but it is not enough to stop the enemy. The road the convoy was moving along is blocked, and the surviving troops have to change their advance routes. A Russian APC with its crew turns onto another path and immediately detonates an anti-tank mine. The surviving soldiers, in panic, abandon the armored vehicle, but in their haste, fail to notice one of them triggering another mine. The crew of this tank also thought they would be able to quickly pass through the dangerous area, but they met the same fate as the APC. Mines play one of the key roles in defending positions, so it's no surprise that this road was also mined. Immediately after the explosion, the Russians abandoned the vehicle, and the kamikaze drone operator effectively finished the job. Meanwhile, other pilots are also staying active and continue hunting down the remnants of the convoy. The first APC was caught right at a turn, and the drone successfully hit its target, going straight into the armored vehicle. His partner also didn't manage to get far and fell into the sights of another kamikaze drone. The driver managed to abandon the armored vehicle just before the explosion tore it apart. The artillery also targets this position, but to ensure the successful destruction, a few more drones strike the APCs from the inside, causing maximum damage. After this, the vehicle will be beyond repair, with no parts left even for spare parts. And the surviving Russian soldiers, after that devastating defeat, will think twice about whether it was worth storming these Ukrainian positions. Probably, the crew of this tank also learned their lesson. After the tank's track was hit, it became an easy target for another team of pilots, who took advantage of the moment and precisely dropped explosives right into its open hatch. It took only a few seconds for the flames to engulf the hull and reach the ammunition. After such a powerful explosion, at first glance, you wouldn't even say that a tank was ever there. Ukrainians are on their own territory, which allows them to take the most advantageous defensive positions and effectively adjust the fire of artillery and drones while being at higher ground. This APC exploded so suddenly that its colleague, who was following behind, didn't immediately realize what had happened. He slowed down slightly to assess the battlefield, but another precise shot immediately destroyed this target as well. 2 shots, 2 hits. Excellent work by the Ukrainian soldiers who deserve a thumbs up for this video. Meanwhile, several more units of armored vehicles and trucks got lost nearby, and the FPV drone operators launched a real hunt for them. One of the vehicles veered off the road into a field and even managed to break away from its pursuers, but it didn't expect that another drone was flying straight toward it from the other side. The Russian assault completely failed. Most of the tanks and APCs attempting to capture Ukrainian positions were disabled or even destroyed, and the soldiers fled into the nearby forest to hide. The Ukrainian warriors now only need to find the remains of the destroyed equipment and make sure it will remain resting forever in these snowy fields. When the equipment is stationary, the FPV pilot can take more time and carefully choose the attack direction to inflict maximum damage by hitting a vulnerable spot, thereby minimizing the number of drones required for destruction. Although drones are relatively inexpensive compared to the cost of the target they destroy, they are still not limitless. After the active assault is halted, a deliberate cleanup of the battlefield from the remnants of Russian Federation forces begins. If the enemy had managed to get closer to Ukrainian positions, Some of the disabled equipment might have been captured as trophies and restored for further combat missions. However, in this situation, attempting to seize even a single abandoned tank or APC is far too risky. Moreover, a kamikaze drone is a single-use weapon. Once the pilot launches it, there's no turning back. It's better to deliver another strike on enemy equipment, even if it's already burning, than to simply crash and detonate in an empty field. But sometimes soldiers manage to capture enemy equipment, as in this particular case. Ukrainian soldiers were on a mission in a Rochelle Senator armored vehicle when they were hit by an enemy FPV drone. One of the personal cameras of the soldiers managed to capture the moment from inside the vehicle. The armor withstood the impact, saving the soldiers' lives, but they were forced to abandon the armored vehicle. Afterward, the armored vehicle fell into the hands of Russian soldiers. It was a rare trophy, and they opened it using explosives, fearing it might be booby-trapped. However, the Ukrainian soldiers had abandoned the vehicle too quickly after the attack, and there was no time to plant any explosives. A Ukrainian tank managed to get close to the Russian stronghold and began shelling the enemy fortifications. It first started shelling the forest line where Russian infantry was hiding, so it's no surprise that the Russians almost immediately began to panic. At the same time, Ukrainian artillery began actively shelling the enemy, who panicked and started fleeing in the opposite direction. Seeing this, the Ukrainians realized they had a chance to reclaim the position captured by the occupiers and continued their counteroffensive. Another Ukrainian tank and several armored vehicles carrying soldiers joined the battle, while the first tank continued suppressing the Russians. This is the Ukrainian T-84 Oplot tank, developed based on the Soviet T-80. Compared to its predecessor, it features significantly improved armor and dynamic protection. Additionally, Russian components were replaced with Ukrainian ones, and new fire control systems were introduced. It continued laying down heavy fire on the position where the enemy was hiding, buying time for reinforcements to move closer. The demoralized soldiers offered no resistance and simply tried to abandon their positions, heading toward a nearby river in the hope of evacuating to the other side. But the Ukrainian soldiers were not idle either. They had advanced so close that they were in a position to deploy their own assault force. They arrived just in time to intercept the enemy's main forces. The tank also had no intention of stopping and continued firing, providing cover for the soldiers who bravely attacked the Russian stronghold. While the Russians attempt to flee, several more armored vehicles, covered by smoke, deploy the next group from the opposite side, and they immediately engage in a firefight. Infantry assault operations are always very dangerous, but with good planning and the support of several tanks, they can succeed. Just like this time, a small group of Russians manages to escape and reach the evacuation point. Realizing this, the Ukrainian assault units regroup and adjust their tactics. They quickly return to the armored vehicle, while other groups are already preparing to deal with the fugitives. At the same time, from the other side of the Russian defensive positions, several more tanks join the counter-operation, immediately starting to destroy the enemy fortifications. At first, the tank attacks a small defensive position in the forest, and then notices a group of soldiers hiding under the railway tracks. With 2 precise shots, it penetrates the tunnel, leaving them no chance of survival. And the next shot most likely hit directly into the ammunition storage, completely destroying the shelter along with the railway track. At the same time, 2 enemy positions were destroyed by Ukrainian tanks, armored vehicles, and infantry. But what happened to the Russian equipment? Wasn't there any in these areas? There was, but Ukrainian FPV drone operators took care of it. Another good example of how one drone, costing thousands, can destroy a tank that cost Russia millions. This pair of tanks also didn't manage to reach their comrades in time. They were caught off guard and intercepted literally halfway to the battlefield. The first kamikaze drone stopped the group, and the next wave finished off the vehicles, turning these deadly machines into piles of burning metal. This armored vehicle was also rushing to their aid, but the drone was faster. This Russian armored vehicle managed to reach firing range. The APC took a position near the reservoir and even began shelling Ukrainian forces, trying to cover the retreat of its soldiers. But it met another misfortune. Continuing to fire, the Russian armored vehicle began to gradually move along the road, not expecting the small surprise that awaited it. The Ukrainians had managed to set up several remote-controlled explosive charges in this area in advance. One of them was triggered by the enemy APC. Although a quad bike is much smaller than armored vehicles, it is not immune to hitting a mine either. In this video, we can observe just such a spectacular instance of destruction. Here, the Russians thought they had successfully camouflaged their two tanks to use it as a stationary defensive points, similar to artillery. Knowing that these tanks were entrenched and unable to move, the Ukrainians launched an entire swarm of kamikaze drones at their fortifications. This time, tree branches didn't help them conceal their equipment from Ukrainian reconnaissance and drone operators. Perhaps they hoped that the branches would obstruct the drone's flight path. Moreover, the dry tree branches burned quite well, further complicating the crew's evacuation. Within a few minutes, the fire engulfs the tanks completely, and the detonation of the ammunition finishes off the enemy equipment.